Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Wednesday, January 15th, 2020. The time is just after 9:10 a.m. and we are in session, gentlemen. We are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. We have one change to the calendar today, and that is South Coast AQMD versus Ralph's Grocery Company, case number 6166-1 for an order for abatement has been rescheduled to January 29th. And that means we have one matter remaining on today's calendar, and that is Equilon Enterprises doing business as Shell Oil Products U.S., case number 4982-121 for a short variance. And who is representing Equilon Enterprises today?
Good morning, Madam Chairman.
Can you just press the button on your, there you go.
My name is Ev Ashworth, and I'm a principal with Ashworth Leininger Group, and we're technical consultants to Equilon Enterprises, doing business as Shell Products U.S. for their Carson terminal.
Good morning, Mr. Ashworth. And who is representing the executive officer this morning?
Nancy S. Feldman for the executive officer.
Good morning, Ms. Feldman. I'm going to ask anyone who wishes to be heard today or who may testify to please rise at this time to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand, and do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Ashworth, if you'd like to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today to request a short variance to allow the use of portable thermal oxidizers or vapor control units to control emissions that would otherwise be provided by existing units that are permitted to operate at the Shell terminal. As we'll explain today, and as set out in our short variance application, the reason that the terminal is using vapor control units is that they must be taken offline to provide for maintenance and to upgrade the electronic control systems, without the use of which the vapor control units would no longer function properly. So we're seeking today for a short variance to allow us to use temporary units which operate under various location permits that have been issued by the South Coast. If we were not to use these temporary rental units, excess emissions to the atmosphere would exceed 8,800 pounds per day of volatile organics, or 4 tons per day of VOC emissions. I'm here today with Jessica Hoffman. She is the Shell Carson Terminal Operations Supervisor, and my colleague, Mr. Mike Waller. He's a senior engineer with ALG. As Ms. Hoffman and Mr. Waller will explain, Shell believes that it has met all 6 of the statutory requirements required for a short variance. We'd also like to acknowledge the assistance of the South Coast District, both legal counsel and technical staff with the reclaim group as well as the permitting group, and we worked through conditions that we could provide for during the term of the short variance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Feldman, your openings.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Chair and members of the board. First, I want to ensure that the members of the board each got a copy of the proposed conditions for today's variance.
No, we did not.
I provided them to the clerk via email.
Well, I'll wait for the clerk. But we will mark the proposed short variance conditions as Exhibit A as an apple.
Thank you. The district does not anticipate any opposition to the short variance being requested here today. Both afterburners at issue here require maintenance, which we understand is scheduled to take place within the next week or 2. During the scheduled maintenance, which of course is something that we like to encourage, the afterburners have to be shut down. Once you've had an opportunity to review the conditions, you'll see that we have provided that only one may be shut down at a time, and there will be a temporary vapor control unit that is on site that is going to control the emissions from the shutdown afterburner. Accordingly, there should be no excess emissions associated with the variance, which is requested for only a short period of time. I don't want to scare the hearing board by the number of people who stood to take the oath. That was in an abundance of caution. In fact, the district does not anticipate calling any affirmative witnesses, but we do have engineering staff here available for you in the event that you might have questions, because they have demands on their time this morning. We're not sure which one of them is going to be in the room when those questions are asked, so you saw multiple people stand up to take the oath. That concludes my opening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ashworth, you may present your first witness.
Thank you. We'd first like to call Ms. Jessica Hoffman, who again is the supervisor of the Shell terminal at Shell Carson. Would you please state your name
Jessica Hoffman,
and your title?
Shell Carson Terminal Operations Supervisor.
And what do you do in that role?
I am responsible for the safe operations of the Carson Chemicals facility and the ethanol rack.
And could you tell the board a little bit about what the Shell Carson distribution complex does?
Can I just stop you there? Can you just spell your name for the record as well?
Jessica. My last name is Hoffman, Hoffman.
Thank you, and you took the oath today.
Yes.
So if you could explain a little bit about what the Shell Carson terminal does.
The Shell Carson distribution facility is a bulk storage and loading terminal. We receive petroleum products and chemicals through pipeline, rail, and truck. We store these materials on site, and then we transfer them off-site via pipeline and truck.
And Madam Chair, we thought it might be helpful to use some graphics to illustrate the specific equipment for which we're seeking a short variance. Those graphics are included in your package for the short variance, but perhaps Ms. Hoffman could go up and use the camera and then explain how the units are designed and operate.
Yes, and I'll ask Madam Clerk to assist in that, and we will refer board members to the petition. I assume these are what is attached to the petition.
Correct.
So these-
Attachments 1, 2, and 3, Madam Chair.
Okay, so why don't we first, let's just mark them for the record, the attachments as exhibits. So each attachment we will mark as exhibits 1 through 5. So attachment 1, which is the process flow diagram for ethanol VCU, will be exhibit 1 and so on. And there's a list of those before each of them.
Okay.
And,
you.
and the clerk, we have additional copies for the clerk if that's necessary.
No, I believe that they are now attached to the petition, and the clerk has a copy.
All right. So Ms. Hoffman, you'll see how that graphic is depicted up on the screen. All right. So first turning to Exhibit 1, which is Attachment 1 in your short variance petition. This is the ethanol vapor control unit. Could you explain briefly how that system operates?
Yes, so you have the Carson ethanol load rack located here. This supplies majority of LA Basin's ethanol. Vapors from loading operations are then transferred to vapor holding tank 404. From there, vapors are processed through the ethanol rack vapor combustor unit, known as a VCU, where the temperature is raised high enough to break VOC to allow for controlled emissions per our permitting emission limits.
And then the proposed thermal oxidizer, which will operate under the various locations permit, where do we propose to introduce that unit?
Yes, so that will be tied in between the vapor holding tank 404 and the permanent VCU unit.
I thought we might pause there, Madam Chair, to see if there might be questions as to the configuration of the equipment.
I think that's a good idea. I'll start with Ms. Feldman if you have any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, board members, any questions on that configuration? Seeing, oh, go ahead, Mr. Balagopalan.
Just a question on the efficiency of the unit compared to the permanent one.
Yes, we plan for the temporary burner to be the same efficiency as the permanent fixture that we have.
How do you ensure that?
Yep, so we've given the third-party contractor nVent our permit requirements, and they've stated that they will be able to comply with them.
And do you know how they, I mean, is it the temperature, the holding, how?
If I may, Mr. Bogoplan, as part of our conditions, we will provide to the district the most recent source test for both of these units, and they demonstrate that the efficiency of the control unit exceeds the required 99%. And that will be a condition among the 5 that we have as part of our variance moving forward.
Thank you for that, and that is part of variance, proposed variance condition number 3.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, just,
And we will provide the source test of their most recent source test that nVent has for both units will be given to the district engineering staff.
you're talking about the permanent one?
No, excuse me, sir, it is the rented
The rental.
portable thermal oxidizers, both of which operate under a various locations permit.
Why don't we hold this for when, why don't,
And Mr. Waller will speak to that in detail.
thank you, and I thought it was a good idea to ask questions just on what we're seeing, but so let's, as we're going through this, let's hold our substantive questions until we're done walking through all of these, but if we're going to ask questions, just really on what we're seeing, so that we don't have to pull it back up again, but let's hold the rest of our questions for the end of the testimony.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Hoffman. If we can turn now to Exhibit 2, which is your attachment 2 in the variance application, and this is for the chemical vapor control unit. So again, we have 2 basic units. One is the ethanol load rack, the ethanol unit. Now the second is the chemical unit. And if you might explain the configuration of that.
Yes, the Carson Chemicals facility is set up in a similar fashion. The main difference is the vapors are going to 2 vapor holding tanks, 7011 and 7012, before being processed within the VCU. Vapors are coming from fixed storage tanks, as well as the renewable diesel and biodiesel rack, and our neighboring facility, Univar, which is a chemical loading operation not owned or operated by Shell.
And you operate with a contract with Univar to handle emissions associated with their loading operations.
That is correct, and so if we were unable to process their vapors, we would be in violation of our contract terms.
Okay. And we'll touch on that in more detail later, Madam Chair. Are there any questions as to the configuration of the current unit or where we propose to introduce the portable thermal oxidizer?
Any questions? Ms. Bellman, any questions?
No questions, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you.
I thought it might be helpful finally to look at Attachment 3, which is now Exhibit 3, just to illustrate within the facility where these units are located. And perhaps, Ms. Hoffman, you can describe the location of the 2 units.
Yes, so this is a general layout of the Shell Carson distribution complex. You can see where the ethanol load rack is located, as well as the chemicals facility and their corresponding vapor holding tanks, as well as where the VCUs are fixed.
And finally, are there any questions as to that configuration?
Any questions on that map and location? Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Hoffman. Perhaps we can return back to your seat here and we'll go forward. And so the Shell short variance petition seeks to provide relief for 2 units, 2 vapor control units. One is the ethanol vapor control unit, and the second is the chemical vapor control unit. And we'll use that terminology, ethanol VCU or ethanol road rack, or the chemical going forward. Ms. Hoffman, could you briefly describe the reason why Shell Carson Terminal is here today?
As you know, the vapor combustor units, the VCUs, are critical pieces of equipment that control VOC emissions. Shell must perform maintenance on these units, certain components of these units, and the variance requested will allow Shell to use a portable thermal oxidizer while we maintain operations. And the point of us being here today is the portable thermal oxidizer is not a part of our current permit, and so we wish to utilize the portable unit, and so we can keep up with our operations and not exceed any emissions.
And otherwise comply with your permit?
Yes, correct.
Okay. How long do you think these maintenance activities are expected to last?
We anticipate the maintenance activities to last 1 week, 2 to 3 days per unit, and the work will be done one at a time. So we'll move from the ethanol rack to the chemicals facility.
And as with all mechanical work, is there a chance that contingencies could cause the maintenance to last longer than anticipated?
Yes, based on Shell's experience with performing maintenance, it is possible that equipment installation, inspection, and troubleshooting may require additional time to assure the safety of operations.
And so taking these into account, what is the time period being requested for the variance coverage?
Shell is requesting a short variance of 4 weeks to assure a sufficient amount of time.
And Madam Chair, you'll note that we were not quite clever about the 2020 time change. And so on page 6 in paragraph 24, you'll note the date is 2019, which just goes to show we had too much fun over the holidays and didn't quite anticipate.
It goes to
the
show
change.
I didn't even notice, but I,
Anyway, so we make that note that we,
I did notice that's not quite 4 weeks. So are you asking for longer than those dates? Or is that 4 weeks?
we
It is about
calculate it
4
as
weeks?
approximately 4
Okay,
weeks.
sorry.
But you're right, that we start on a Monday and close out on a Friday, right? So could you please provide a brief overview of the specific maintenance activities that will be performed during this period?
We plan to upgrade the programmable logic controller, the PLC, which is a digital computer critical to the automation of the VCU process, and therefore it's critical to reliable operations and permit compliance.
And maybe we can take these in turn, so perhaps you can explain how it is that we anticipate the schedule for this maintenance on the individual units.
If the variance is approved, we will bring in the portable units and get those set up, and that will allow for the continued operations of the ethanol rack and the chemicals facility during the planned maintenance.
And why is this maintenance necessary? Again, if we might go over the basic thinking there.
The VCUs have parts that are becoming obsolete, and the upgrades are deemed necessary.
And what would be the risk of not performing this maintenance?
The risk of not performing this maintenance could lead to malfunction of the electronic control systems that are critical to permit compliance.
And would it be possible to perform this maintenance while continuing operation of both the chemical vapor control unit and the ethanol vapor control unit?
The original VCU manufacturer, John Zink, directs that the units be shut down to ensure the safe replacement of parts.
And is it your opinion that shutting down both the chemical vapor control unit and the ethanol vapor control unit is the only way to perform this maintenance properly and safely?
Yes, as the terminal operations supervisor, it is the only way I feel safe to complete this planned maintenance and ensure the safety of our personnel and contractors.
Thank you. Have you considered curtailing operations during the period of maintenance in lieu of requesting this short variance?
Yes, we have considered curtailing operations.
And for the chemical vapor control unit, could you explain why it's not possible to curtail those operations?
We are the recipient and deliverer of several chemicals and solvents. In addition, we are an active supplier of renewable diesel and biodiesel at the load rack. And like I stated before, Shell is contracted by our neighboring facility, Univar, to process their vapors. And so a violation of us, well, we would be in violation of not being able to process.
And if you curtailed operations and turned off the vapor control unit, would there still be excess emissions?
Yes, curtailing operations would not mitigate all emissions, as those fixed storage tanks within the chemicals facility would still continue to vent to vapor holding tanks 7011 and 7012.
And if you could explain, what would happen if the portable vapor control units were not used to control the emissions?
If the VCU is not running, then the vapor holding tanks would exceed capacity and vent to the atmosphere, causing excess emissions.
So that's on the chemical vapor control unit. Let's turn and now consider the ethanol control unit. Why would it not be possible to curtail emission at the ethanol control unit?
At the ethanol unit, that load rack supplies majority of LA Basin's ethanol, and so if we were to stop that operation, it would create a significant supply interruption.
And the ethanol is a component of gasoline that's used in
Yes.
passenger cars and trucks. All right. What would happen if the portable vapor control unit was not used to control emissions off of the ethanol load rack?
Sorry, could you say
Sorry,
that again?
if we didn't have this temporary vapor control unit, the portable unit in place, what would happen to the emissions from the ongoing operations at the ethanol load rack?
Yep, so ceasing the operation would greatly impact supply, as stated, without any environmental benefit.
So, Ms. Hoffman, we truly talked that the manufacturer, John Zink, recommended that the maintenance be performed on the vapor control units to function properly. If this maintenance is not performed, is there an increased risk that the vapor control units could malfunction in the future?
Yes, per the subject matter experts in the VCU field, we have been advised that a malfunction is probable, and current parts are becoming obsolete, and a plant upgrade is required.
And if the vapor control unit, combustion units do not operate, is there a risk that excess emissions would be released to the environment?
Yes, the vapor holding tanks could exceed capacity and vent to the atmosphere, causing excess emissions. So the granting of this variance will allow Shell to control vapors per the portable unit and ensure the safety of the workers on site as well as the general public.
So would you agree that the denial of this variance would not have a corresponding benefit in reducing air emissions?
Denial of the variance request would not have any benefit in reducing air contaminants. The use of the portable unit, while maintenance is performed, will assure that there's no excess VOC emissions.
Thank you. And that concludes the testimony of Ms. Hoffman. Would it be a good place to stop here to see if there might be questions of her?
Yes. So, Ms. Feldman, do you have questions for Ms. Hoffman?
Yes, just a few, thank you. Just for clarification, will there be one portable oxidizer, a thermal oxidizer brought in, or two?
There will be two.
Are they both of the same make and model?
That is a good question. I would.
Do you need to,
We have,
if you need to defer to another
Yes.
witness, okay, I'll just hold that until we're finished with you. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to it.
Okay.
No worries. How, you put down in your petition that the manufacturer, the maintenance is being conducted essentially according to manufacturer's recommendation. How often is this maintenance performed?
So we conduct quarterly maintenance on our units, and that's when John Zink, the third-party vendor, makes recommendations for further maintenance. So we do routine maintenance upkeep, of course, and then if any additional maintenance is required, that's when we'll have that conversation.
And is that what this situation is, which is requiring that you actually shut down the units?
No, this is a recommendation that exceeds the routine maintenance. It's a little bit more complicated, where we need to shut down the units, whereas normally we don't.
When was the last time you had to shut down the units for maintenance?
I don't remember. I could get back to you.
we have that information in our short variance application, and we can provide those. It was in the third quarter of this year, of
Okay.
last year.
Okay, I'll defer that question then as well. I don't think I have any other questions for this witness. Thank you.
Board members, anyone have questions for Ms. Hoffman? Mr. Balagopalan?
Ms. Hoffman, have you reviewed the various location permit? Have you, do you have copies of those various location permit that you're renting it, I take it, those units?
Yes, I do have copies of the permit that I'm supposed to comply with.
And indeed, I know there are temperature requirements for the existing VCUs and the thermal units of at least a minimum 1,500.
Yes.
Do you know if the conditions are the same on the portable units?
I would think so, but I would have to confer to one of my,
Mr. But Mr. Mike Waller will speak to that issue.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Senator?
What's the difference, if there's any, between ethanol control unit, or ethanol and chemical?
so both VCUs are there to break the VOC and control emissions per our permit. So essentially, both units are the same.
They both provide energy for a certain function, correct? Why would one choose chemical over ethanol?
Could you state the question again?
Why would the choice be either or, chemical versus the use of ethanol?
Okay, so we have different needs within our business. So the load rack is for,
Keep pushing the button, I don't know.
oh,
Distracted me. Go ahead.
so business need causes us to have the ethanol load rack and process the vapors within that area of our facility. And then on the chemical side, we are responsible for bringing in several chemicals and solvents. And so that area has a different priority.
So chemical may be importing crude from outside of the country, correct?
We don't have any crude at the Carson Distribution Complex.
Okay. But I just want to state, however, the ethanol makes us energy independent, because ethanol you can make here at home.
Yeah, so the ethanol that we have on site comes from all over, and we are a major supplier of LA Basin's ethanol, which, as you know, is used for the motor vehicle fuel.
That being the case, I think it's worthwhile to note, however, that one of my former seatmates, he was no longer with us, Senator Bill Green, was the author of Ethanol, got the state behind it to study ethanol so that we could become energy independent and it can be done without having to import.
Thank you, Senator. Do you have any other questions for Ms. Hoffman? Ms. Hoffman, are you the witness who will talk to the rules sections from which you are seeking variance? No. Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Ms. Hoffman? No.
If I may clarify, Madam Chair, on paragraph 8 of our short variance petition, we listed the dates on which the routine maintenance was last performed on both the chemical and the ethanol unit. And in reading this, Ms. Hoffman, does that refresh your memory as to when the most recent maintenance had been performed on both the units?
Yes, it does.
Could you provide that information to the board, if you would?
Chemical preventative maintenance was conducted on November 25th, 2019, and the preventative maintenance on the ethanol VCU was conducted on August 29th of 2019.
And Ms. Hoffman, do you know that firsthand, or is that just based on your reading of the petition?
I was there at the site when it happened.
Thank you. Any other questions then for Ms. Hoffman? Thank you, Ms. Hoffman, very much. Mr. Ashworth, you may present your next witness.
Good. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Our second witness this morning is Mr. Mike Waller, my colleague at Ashworth Mining Group. Mr. Waller, would you please state and spell your name, please?
Yes, my name is Michael Waller, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, last name W-A-L-L-E-R.
And what is your title, Mr. Waller?
Senior engineer,
And how long have you been in that role?
close to 20 years.
And could you provide a general description of how you've assisted Shell in this matter?
I began working with the Shell Carson terminal in approximately the year 2000 and have been working with the facility, not only permitting items at the facility, but also preparing annual emissions reports, AB 2588 reports, and other compliance assistance as needed.
And Mr. Waller, are you familiar with the list of violations that are set out in our short variance application?
Yes, I am.
And what are those violations?
So the violations are noted in the variance application on page 3, paragraph 9, and There are violations that would occur to both the ethanol load rack and then the chemical side operations. Firstly, at the ethanol load rack, there is a requirement for the ethanol load rack vapor holding tank to vent directly to the thermal oxidizer, which is permanent to and permitted with the Shell Carson terminal. And when that unit goes down, we will no longer be able to vent to that stationary or that stationary vapor control unit. Secondly,
And if you would, what is the control unit in terms of its number or identity for the ethanol load rack?
the control unit for the ethanol load rack is device C887.
All right, thank you. And now continuing with the chemical load rack.
Now, at the chemicals unit, it's a similar situation where there's two vapor holding tanks. That's tank 7011 and 7012, which was referenced previously by Ms. Hoffman. And those tanks also have a permit condition, E336.3, which require those vapor holding tanks to vent to the chemical side vapor combustion unit, which is C764. And during the maintenance operation, those vapor holding tanks will no longer be able to vent to C764.
And are there district rules and regulations that would be violated if the variance were not granted?
Yes, separately, both of the vapor combustion units are subject to general permitting and compliance conditions 203B, 2004 F1, and 3002 C1, which in general terms indicate that these permitted devices must operate at all times in accordance with all permit terms and conditions.
Would it be possible for Shell to control emissions while either of the vapor control units are shut down without violating its Title V permit?
No, it is not.
Are you familiar with the process and equipment that is subject to the hearing today?
Yes, I am. The equipment that's subject to the hearing today is on page 2, paragraph 6 of the petition. And that's in the table right there in paragraph 6. So it's the first two lines in that table refer to the ethanol load rack, first the bulk loading station, and the second is the John Zinc afterburner, or the VCU at the ethanol load rack. That's devices D884 and C887. And then the second grouping of devices would be for the chemical side operations. That's tank 7011 and 7012, D330, D763, and the John Zinc afterburner or vapor control unit C764.
Are you familiar with the emissions generated from these equipment?
Yes, I am.
If the portable vapor control unit was not allowed to control emissions during the maintenance period, would there be excess emissions from both process units?
Yes, there would.
And have you been able to calculate the amount of excess emissions from the chemical vapor control unit?
Yes, we estimated the excess emissions that would occur if we were not allowed to vent to a portable unit. At the chemical side operations, these emissions would be approximated as 76 pounds per day of VOC emissions.
And does that estimate include any emissions from the Univar facility?
No, those emissions are strictly related to Shell operations and not the emissions that would continue to occur from Univar.
And so the emissions would be in excess of the 76 pounds
Correct.
that you offered. Are you, now changing over to the ethanol, what would be your estimate of excess emissions at the ethanol vapor control unit?
So at the ethanol vapor control unit, it's significantly larger, and those emissions would amount to approximately 8,700 pounds per day if not vented to the portable vapor control unit.
And would these excess emissions occur if the portable thermal oxidator is used?
No, they would not.
And when the portable thermal oxidator is in place, what are the excess emissions?
We're not anticipating any excess emissions if we're allowed to use a portable vapor control unit.
Does the portable vapor control unit that we're proposing to rent, one for the ethanol and one for the chemical, do they operate under a South Coast issued permit?
Yes, there are two separately issued various locations permits issued by the South Coast Air Quality Management District for these two portable units that we're anticipating to use.
And what is the minimum operating temperature for both of the control units?
Both control units have a minimum operating temperature requirement of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Is that at the same or higher than the minimum operating temperatures required of the chemical and the ethanol vapor control unit?
Yes, if I'm remembering correctly, the ethanol vapor control unit has a minimum operating temperature of 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and the chemical side thermal oxidizer has a minimum operating temperature of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
And what is the minimum emission control efficiency of these portable thermal oxidizers?
By permit, they have a minimum operating efficiency of 99%, and they have been source tested to be much higher. The portable units of source test show much higher control efficiency than the 99%.
And will Shell or will ALG provide a copy of the most recent source test for both units to the district in advance of performing the maintenance activities?
Yes, we will, and that's one of the requirements, of the proposed requirements of the variance.
And are there emission monitoring and reporting requirements for the portable vapor control units while they operate at the Shell facility?
Yes, and that's a two-part answer. We not only have requirements from the proposed variance conditions that we will have to monitor certain items on the bladder tanks and vapor control units, but then also the various locations permits issued to nVent Corporation have additional monitoring requirements, which we would also follow.
And that concludes Mr. Waller's direct testimony, if there's questions for him.
Thank you. Ms. Feldman, do you have questions for Mr. Waller?
Yes, thank you. So we were directed briefly to paragraph 8 in the petition, which talks about the routine maintenance program. However, my question really went beyond that, and I'd like to know if you're capable of answering this question. When is the last time that an inspection was done that indicated that more maintenance was required that resulted in the equipment having to be shut down, much like this exercise here today? Do you know when the last time?
That's not a question that I would be able to answer. That's more of a question for the facility, for Ms. Hoffman.
Right. Okay, so I apologize, Ms. Hoffman, that you didn't quite get what I was going for
Now I've
there.
had a little bit more time to think about your question. A couple months ago, I'm not sure of the exact date, but we did perform maintenance on the chemicals VCU, which required us to replace the burner within the unit. And we performed the work while monitoring the vapor holding tank 7011 and 7012. So we were able to perform that work before we reached a high level on the vapor tanks.
Okay.
So the VCU was put back into service so we could continue to control emissions.
So you didn't require a variance for that
Correct.
operation? I understand. Okay. We'll go back to you, Mr. Waller, and thank you for that, Ms. Hoffman. Did you have an opportunity to review the source tests that were done on the portable equipment?
Yes, I have.
They demonstrated that they operate at least as efficiently, if not more, than the permanent units?
That's correct. They operate at least as efficiency as the required control efficiency of the permitted units.
Right. Have you reviewed the conditions that we submitted to the hearing board this morning? That
Yes,
would
I
be-
have.
Okay. And based on your experience with the facility, can Shell comply with these conditions?
Absolutely. We have the monitoring equipment in place that's required to obtain the data, and also we'll set up operating logs where we need to record that same data to provide to the district.
Okay. And I want to draw your attention to proposed condition number 5, which would be attached to the variance, and the hearing board as well. Condition number 5 requires that any emissions from the portable thermal oxidizer shall be calculated in accordance with missing data procedures as set forth in district rules. Will you be doing those calculations for the facility?
Yes, I will.
Okay. And do you have no problem with complying with that particular condition on the variance?
No, we do not, and we'll coordinate directly with the Reclaim Engineering Group to ensure that we're doing those in accordance with the reclaim regulations.
Okay. And finally, based on the clarification that was provided this morning, which I honestly needed, that there will be two portable thermal oxidizers brought onto the facility, do you think it would be advisable to go through the conditions and make the references to the portable thermal oxidizer plural?
Sure, I think that would be acceptable to us,
Okay.
definitely.
I will do that as the hearing progresses and then provide further clarification for the board when the case is turned over to the district.
Okay. I had a question with regard to the rules from which you're seeking a variance. I just want to make sure, because you didn't mention them, but they are listed here on page 3, item 9, where you mention condition E336.3 in parentheses, you say Rule 1303, Rule 1401, and Rule 462. Those are just descriptive. You're not requesting actual variance coverage from those rules?
So to clarify, in the first row, in the Title V reclaim permit, the bladder tanks have in their connected to column of the device description a requirement to vent to control device C887.
Right.
And that's for the ethanol side, we're requesting variance from that connected to requirement.
I'm more looking at the second.
Correct. And in the second one, the condition E336.3 also requires a connection to control device C764. And the basis as written in the permit for condition E336.3 is Rule 1303, Rule 1401, and Rule 462. That's written in the basis of that permit condition.
Correct. So you're just asking for a variance relief from condition E336.3, not those rules.
Correct.
Okay. And I understand the indirect. Okay, the other question I had was, you mentioned that if you could not vent to the portable thermal oxidizers, the chemical tank would be 76 pounds per day of VOC excess emissions, correct?
Correct.
Is that if you continue to operate?
That's correct. The 76 pounds per day would be emissions from the fixed roof storage tanks, which will continue to operate, or will continue to have emissions regardless of whether operations are curtailed or not, because fixed roof tanks will continue to vent. But it also does include a small amount of emissions from the renewable fuels diesel loading.
Okay, so do you have any numbers if you did not operate with that's the chemical tanks, correct? Or the chemical
For
operation?
just the chemicals tanks, I do believe.
So the number you gave, that was for chemical operations, the 76 pounds per
correct.
day? So do you have any,
And that does not include the adjacent facility from the emissions from the Univar facility, which is next door, for which we control emissions.
do you have, for those same chemical operations that you gave us, the 76 pounds per day VOC in operation, if you were to shut down operations, I guess loading or whatever, other operations, do you have a number of what would be the?
Yes, so
Emissions.
based on the 2018 emissions that were reported to the South Coast Air Quality Management District, we have approximately 1 pound per day from the renewable diesel load rack. And that's an annual average number. So of the 76 pounds, 1.3 comes from the loading operation, and then approximately 75 or 74.5 pounds comes from the fixed roof storage tanks, which will still, even if we shut down the vapor combustion unit, we'll still have product in those tanks. And as those tanks heat up during the day, the sun will heat them up and it will
So
displace
it's just
vapors.
breathing
losses.
Okay,
And
so
those-
most of it is breathing loss.
Most of those will continue to occur regardless of whether we curtail the loading operation or not.
And similarly, on the ethanol, you said 8,700 pounds per day of VOC. How much of that is because if you remain in operation as opposed to if you were to shut down during, while you were replacing the?
That's entirely from remaining in operation.
Okay, so there will be no breathing losses.
Correct. These are not, the ethanol side is not connected to storage tanks.
Okay.
It's only
It's
connected to
all-
a load rack.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else have questions? Senator?
You're using the vapor control unit to ask for a variance to use the vapor control unit to eliminate the emission, is that correct?
Correct, where the variance is asking to use, we have a stationary unit that's permitted,
understand.
and we're asking to use a portable unit in its
Portable.
place on a temporary
A
basis.
portable, yes.
Correct.
And you're saying that the efficiency is about 99, greater than 99%?
Correct. The efficiencies by permit are 99%, by source test are greater than 99.9%.
Or 99.9, okay. You said 99. The point nine, I'm going to ask you how close that is to 100. 0.9, okay. That's absolute efficient. And you continue to operate with the temporary vapor control unit. You're right on target.
That's correct.
Other questions, board members? Mr. Balagopalan?
Mr. Waller, let me go to the conditions, if you can go through that. Let me go through the proposed condition number 2, which says that monitor the vapor levels and the static pressure. And what's the purpose of that?
That's of the vapor holding tanks. They measure the pressure in the tank and the vapor levels and the static pressure to make sure that the vapor holding tanks do not exceed their capacities.
And so is there a limit? Is there a number you're looking at when when you're saying you're monitoring, and so what is the set level that?
I do know that at the chemical side operations, those bladder tanks have a 2.25 inches of water column limitation, and then also a high level limit of, I believe it's 24 feet. And I'm not sure at ethanol rack if they have permit conditions for the pressure and height. But we do have operational limitations on the pressure and heights of the ethanol bladder or vapor holding tanks.
So this condition is to, you're saying in the permit there,
In the permit, there is a limitation on the
limitation.
chemical side bladder tanks. There is not a permitted limit on the ethanol side bladder or vapor holding tanks, but there are operational limits at the ethanol
and
vapor.
so this condition is to continue the requirements in the permit?
Correct.
Whatever the limits are in the permit?
Correct.
Okay. Then let me go to condition number 3. You're going to, you're bringing in a portable thermal oxidizer that has been permitted. Do you know who has been issued to? The company?
Yes, it's the NVent Corporation.
Okay.
And
And
they
they're
operate.
both are the same, yeah.
They're not the same make and model, but they're both issued to NVent Corporation.
And they've been tested at some different location.
Correct. They're used at various locations throughout the air basin for tank degassing, pipeline cleanings, marine load operations. That's what their permits have been issued for.
Okay. So when it says shall meet the minimum operation performance standard, specifically the minimum combustion temperature in the firebox. Now, how is the condition in the existing permit says 1,400 degrees and 1,500, but where is it measured?
In the firebox itself,
In the firebox, not
not in the stack. No, it's where the oxidation is occurring.
so at the firebox. So you're going to do the same then?
Correct.
At this, okay.
And the NVent Corporation, various locations permits have monitoring requirements, the temperature requirements and continuous monitoring requirements built into their various locations permits as well.
And it's a minimum of 1,500, you said?
Correct, for both NVent Corporation units have a minimum temperature of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
And do they have adjustments when the temperature drops to add supplemental fuel, or is that how?
Correct, and that's how they're set up physically and engineering wise to add supplemental fuel when the temperature gets below set points.
Okay. Okay, so that, and then if it's going to condition number 4, it continuously monitor the waste gas flow. That's based on the existing meter that there is, or you're having with this new setup, are you rerouting? Where is the waste flow meter going to be? Is it the same location or is it a different one?
They both currently have waste gas flow meters, but nVent in addition can also monitor the waste gas flow.
And there's a limit, there's a condition limiting the, or minimum waste gas flow?
Only at the chemical site operation, there's a 300 CFM waste gas flow limit
Okay.
that's currently continuously monitored at the chemical site operation.
So should there be a reference saying that, to that condition in this?
We'd be more than willing to take that condition, but it's already listed in the Title V permit, and we will continue to comply with that 300 CFM waste gas flow limit.
Okay. And you're not asking variance from that flow, and you expect the same, or?
That's correct. Other than the portable unit that we're using to control emissions, we're not asking for variance from other permit terms and conditions.
And then the reason of condition number 5, the reason you're using missing data provision to calculate emissions?
It was discussed yesterday with Mr. George Illis of the Reclaim Group, and per his opinion, it was the Reclaim NOx emissions were best calculated and reported using missing data procedures because this is a unit that does not have the same monitoring ability as the existing ethanol vapor control unit. The existing vapor control unit at the ethanol rack has an in-stack volumetric flow meter, which is used to calculate NOx emissions for reporting purposes, and the nVent Corporation thermal oxidizer does not have that in-stack volumetric flow meter in it. And it would take much time to get a SEM system certified with the South Coast and installed, and it would be past the time that we would be able to do the maintenance on these units.
So it would be fair to say this will be a conservative estimate then?
Extremely conservative.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Verdugo Peralta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at page 3, item number 8. I missed that first date of the inspection that you were giving for 2019. I got the 08/29/19. I didn't get the first one.
The first date that I listed for the preventative maintenance at the chemicals facility is November 25th, 2019.
Okay. Now, I want to understand, I understand why you need to shut the units down per the OEM, but based on this item number, what is the average life of the equipment that you're replacing?
So I can only speak to my experience within this side of the business, which is about 1.5 years in. So we wish to continue to perform preventative maintenance on the units, so we don't have to do a full replacement of the unit. So as long as we keep up with our quarterly inspections and do the work that's advised by our vendor, John Zink, we should be able to continue to comply with our permit conditions.
That's not exactly my question. My question is really, what is the life of the equipment that you are replacing on average, if you know that, or if anybody of your team knows that?
I'm not sure. We could get back to you.
If I may, I may be able to answer your question. We're not replacing portions of the vapor control unit like the burner, the stack. We're replacing electrical components on that unit. So you could be compared to a laptop. After a while, your laptop becomes obsolete, out of date. The software is no longer supported, and so everything is operating the same way other than the electrical equipment that's going to drive this unit. So we're replacing the electrical components. I don't know the exact lifetime of those electrical components other than the electrical components have become obsolete and parts are getting hard to find.
Yes, I understood that.
Okay.
Have you had to do this before?
Not to my knowledge, but I've been there for a year and a half. And I think the PLC has been there for quite some time.
So this is a unique scenario that we're looking at here.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for either witnesses, I believe at this point? Okay. Senator, did you have questions? I think you need to turn it, yes.
And 3, you have here prior to its operation.
We're talking about condition number 3 and the proposed conditions of Exhibit A.
Shall emit a source test report to supervisor, right? But the minimum operating and performance standard, you may have answered this already. Explain that to me as it relates to the 99% you're trying to achieve.
That is correct. So we're being required that the portable units meet the minimum operating standards of the existing units and what they're required to do by permit and by rule. And so we will continue to meet those minimum operating standards.
But also in 4, you talk about a supplemental fuel flow. In the petition shall continuously monitor the waste gas flow rate. Is you going to have a waste gas flow rate, and if you're obtaining 99.9%?
That's the waste gas flow rate into the unit before it's destroyed.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Balagopalan?
Is there, there's no recorder, right, for the temperature, so it's just visible just to make sure the 1500 on the portable unit?
No, there's a continuous chart recorder
There's a
on the portable units.
Portable units, okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you. Mr. Ashworth, did you wish to present any other witnesses?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Ms. Feldman, you did not plan on introducing any witnesses either. And anyone else need any other witnesses to ask questions? Okay, thank you very much. So I will ask at this time if there's any member of the public who is present who wishes to be heard today on this matter, and I see none. So, Mr. Ashworth, if you'd like to give a brief closing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me briefly review again the 6 standards that we must show compliance with to secure our short variance. As Mr. Waller described, absent this short variance, we will be in violation of both district regulations, our permit, and district rules. He went through his table. I'll summarize briefly. Relative to the ethanol rack, we must be connected to a control device C887, and during the variance, we will not. Relative to the chemical vapor control unit, we must be connected to a control device C764, and during the variance period, we will not. We will also, in the chemical unit, violate condition 336.3. And both units will violate rules 203B, 2004 F1, and 3002 C1. As explained by both Ms. Hoffman and Mr. Waller, due to circumstances beyond Shell's reasonable control, requiring compliance with these permit terms and conditions would impose an unreasonable burden by not allowing Shell to control emissions and thereby ensuring the safety of its workers, the safety of its contractors, and the safety of the public. As explained by both Mr. Waller and Ms. Hoffman, requiring immediate compliance with applicable district regulations and the Title V permit would have no corresponding benefit. In fact, granting this variance is necessary to assure the safety of the public, the safety of the contractors, and the safety of Shell, and as well as mitigating 4 tons of organic emissions per day to the atmosphere. As explained by Ms. Hoffman, the facility is not able to completely curtail operations without generating emissions, and that will significantly impact the regional's ethanol market and also the cost and availability of gasoline without any corresponding benefit. As explained by Mr. Waller, during the variance period, Shell will minimize emissions to the maximum extent feasible by using the portable vapor control units to control emissions. As explained by Mr. Waller, we will continue to monitor emissions of both temporary control units And Ms. Feldman, that was perhaps my mistake that I wasn't clear that we needed 2 of these units. But we'll continue to monitor the compliance with permit terms and conditions and work closely with the district engineering staff to assure our data are robust. And we thank you very much for your attention to this important matter. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Feldman, your closing.
Yes, thank you. The district remains unopposed to the granting of a short variance here today, and we thank the petitioner for a very concise and thorough presentation. I do have some very minor revisions to make to the proposed conditions that were submitted to the board in advance of the hearing. These should be easy to track, starting with condition number 3. Should read, as each thermal oxidizer is taken out of service for maintenance, petitioner shall use one of 2 portable thermal oxidizers permitted under a various locations permit in its place. And then going further down to the sentence that begins with prior to its operation, it should say prior to its operation, petitioner shall mail source test reports, plural, to supervising AQ inspector, Joseph Law, demonstrating that the portable thermal oxidizers meet this minimum VOC control efficiency. On number 4, petitioner shall continuously monitor the waste gas flow rate, supplemental fuel flow rate, and combustion temperature of each portable thermal oxidizer during the variance period and keep records. Finally, condition number 9, emissions from each portable thermal oxidizer shall be calculated in accordance with missing data procedures set forth in Rule 2012 Appendix A. I just want to note in this regard that this is to monitor NOx, that's to calculate, I should say, NOx emissions, a reclaimed pollutant. That would be condition number 5, emissions from each portable thermal oxidizer. Okay, that's the only revision to condition number 5 is to change the to each, but I'm just noting for the hearing board's understanding, not that it's part of the condition, that we have that in here because the portable equipment that is being made available to petitioner, neither of the portable thermal oxidizers have a stack monitor, which is something that would be required by reclaim rules to measure the NOx emissions. And because the hearing board does not have the ability to grant a variance from the use of missing data procedures to calculate emissions of reclaimed pollutants, rather than wait to certify the equipment as required under reclaim, petitioner has agreed to use missing data procedures to calculate NOx emissions from the portable equipment during the variance period. This will undoubtedly result in an overestimation and potentially a great overestimation of NOx emissions during the variance period. So subject to the imposition of the proposed conditions as submitted to the board and just revised in my closing, the district is unopposed to the granting of a short variance here today.
Thank you. Board members, anyone wish to begin a conversation on the 6 findings? I believe they can be made in this situation. We can go through them probably pretty quickly. Did you want to? Okay, I can do it. Would you like to, Ms. Verdugo-Peralta?
I'm very appreciative of all of the information, the schematics that you presented. It was very thorough, and that helps us see exactly what you're trying to do. In this case, I don't have any opposition to it at all, and I have been able to also find the 6 findings. Thank you.
Okay. I will go through them just briefly, and then we can have any further discussion. So the petitioner will be, once it does, so the point of this is, as I think Ms. Feldman aptly put it in the beginning, in her opening, something we all like to see, which is preventative maintenance. And so to do the preventative maintenance on these two VCU units, there will be several, rules, district rules 203B, 2004F1, and 3002C1, that they will be in violation of, which all refer to conditions or equipment descriptions of in their permit regarding the connection to and full use of both of these VCUs, both for the ethanol and the chemical. And on the chemical side, it's to the tanks, and on the ethanol and loading racks. And but definitely to the tanks, is there loading racks for that? But for ethanol, it's all for the loading rack. But regardless, those connections need to be made, and they can't be for safety reasons. The VCUs need to be taken out of operation in order to do this preventative maintenance, which is wiring. And as was very well described, I think, it was to explain that this is obsolete wiring like your computer, which could lead to malfunction if it's not done. And so I believe that this is due to conditions beyond their reasonable control. Maintenance needs to be done, and it needs to be taken, both units need to be taken out of service to do it. And I think it would be an unreasonable taking a property not to allow preventative maintenance and just to simply wait for obsolete wiring to cause malfunction, which would then lead to uncontrolled emissions as well. I believe that closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants, because as we've heard, the plan is to bring in 2 portable thermal oxidizers, both of which definitely are expected at a minimum to have the same control efficiency, and by source test reportedly are expected to have a better control efficiency than the VCUs that exist. Curtailing operations for the chemical tanks is not an option at all, because even if they stopped all loading, unloading, in and out of the tanks, the breathing losses for VOCs would be very significant. And curtailment is not really an option for ethanol, because we've heard that to shut that down, it is the major supplier in the region of ethanol, and that's a major disruption, and does not make sense to curtail those operations instead of a variance, which would simply swap out the control devices for something equally as good or better. And excess emissions are going to be reduced to the maximum extent feasible, because they will be zero. And there will be some monitoring provisions that are built into the variances proposed conditions that are found in Exhibit A. So with that, I think that's all the findings, Mr. Balagopalan.
I agree. I think we can make the 6 findings, and the fact that they're only asking relief from the emissions going to the permanent vapor recovery unit, and so by replacing it with a portable unit, they're achieving the same or more reduction. And I think all the monitoring, so the variance doesn't give them relief from all the monitoring requirements, so they're going to the permit conditions will still stay as in the Title V permit, and the variance condition that is proposed will ensure that they still continue monitor the vapor pressures and static pressure in the tanks, the temperature in the firebox for the portable unit, the thermal oxidizer, and then they'll continue to monitor the waste gas flow, and all those which are conditions in the permit. So all those conditions will be monitored, and to make sure they're meeting the permit conditions that are still in effect.
Senator?
I agree. The points are well made. You will be in violation, number one, and the conditions beyond your control. The specification in the specs suggests that maintenance be provided at certain periods of time and are replaced with the vapor control unit. and that's what you've done, temporary. Usually temporary one until the permanent one can be replaced. Because considering the safety of the personnel who would be mechanically making that change, you looked at the closing and taking, or shall we say, the applicant in various has given consideration you have, and doing the variance, what you're going to do, you're going to come in with a temporary vapor control system that takes care of 3, 4, and 5. In consideration, that is. And so therefore, the vapor control, the temporary vapor control, is what you're asking for a variance for, to use it. So you covered all the points in your presentation. It's not part of the evidence, and I support it.
Dr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to succinctly reiterate some of the feelings that have been expressed. I want to congratulate the petitioner on the preparation of the petition. It really was very clearly written and easy to understand what was necessary with regards to vapor control from organic loading operations and utilization of a temporary vapor control unit to ensure the safety not only of the workers at the facility, but the public in general. Your presentation today also was succinct and to the point and easily understood, and I just wanted to tell you that we appreciate that very much, and thank you. And of course, I do find that we've made the 6 findings to grant the variance requested.
And for the record, as Ms. Fellman pointed out in her closing, I just wanted to point out, since our variances are reviewed, that condition number 5 of the proposed conditions does make it so that any variance granted today is a proper variance and not falling within the prohibited area. And with that, I will just make a motion in the matter of Equilon Enterprises LLC doing business as Shell Oil Products U.S., case number 4982-121. I move that we grant a short variance beginning on January 20th and continuing through February 14th, 2020, or until final compliance, whichever occurs first. It is for the terminal, the Carson Terminal, that is located at 20945 South Wilmington Avenue in Carson, 90810. And it is with regard to all of the devices, tanks, loading racks, afterburners that are listed on page 2, item number 6 of the petition. It will also be from Rules 203B, 2004 F1, and 3002 C1 with regard to condition E 336.3 of the permit with regard to the chemical tanks and the requirement to vent all gases to VCU C764 and to have that in full use. As well as the equipment descriptions, both requiring D884 in the ethanol to be connected to control device C887, and also the connection of the chemical tanks to VCU C764. I further move that we include the proposed variance conditions that are found in Exhibit A with the changes that beginning in condition number 3 on the first line. Petitioner shall use one of the 2 portable thermal oxidizers, plural, under a various location permit in its place. The last part of the sentence, let's see. Prior, the last sentence, we're going to also, which is 3 lines up, petitioner shall email source test reports, plural, so getting rid of the word and adding an S, And then on the next line, demonstrating that each portable thermal oxidizer meets this minimum VOC control efficiency. Similarly, in item 4 or condition 4, on the second line, instead of and combustion temperature of the portable thermal oxidizer will be of each portable thermal oxidizer. And finally, in 5, emissions from, instead of the, it will be each portable thermal oxidizer. And expected excess emissions are 0 VOCs, and that completes, so no excess emissions anticipated. And that completes my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Balagopalan seconds. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none. Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
Dr. Bernstein, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Verdugo Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Balagopalan votes?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much on a very succinct hearing. Any other business, board members? Okay, we are adjourned.